So we thought it would be nice to do a midway assessment of what we've done so far.
Yeah.
And we kind of separately went and did some writing as to what thoughts we want to have. I kind of structured it more as just being able to talk about the big chunks of the project.
Okay.
And I don't know if you have more specific ideas
Yeah,
or
some.
okay. So, we have the three big aspects, which are the walking, the podcast, and the clothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought maybe we could just go through each of those
Yeah, sure. That sounds good.
and work from there. So
Yeah,
which one do you want to start
sounds great.
with?
Ooh. Let's talk about the walking. Let's talk about the walking first.
Okay,
That's the main thing we're doing.
that's true.
I think when we were first starting this project, the walking, the podcast, and the clothing all felt like equal thirds.
Mm-hmm.
And now I definitely feel like the walking is the main, it's like the big red part of the gobstopper, even though that's actually quite small. It's like the big center
Okay.
of the project. And then the podcast kind of like just encircles that.
Uh-huh.
And then the clothing is like in there with the walking almost.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
sure. Yeah. So what are you thinking about the walking?
Well, I'm thinking about a couple of different things. There's the physical aspect of it. There's the information that we're taking in. There's the understanding of the geography. So starting with that, I do feel like my understanding of like where things are and how the city relates to itself has changed a lot. Like I feel like I have a much better understanding of all of that, distances and locations, and sort of like, especially when I'm trying to orient myself, I feel like I have still like within our apartment, I can't tell you where anything is outside, but when we're actually out there, I can really picture the maps. And now that we've actually walked so many streets and from neighborhood to neighborhood, I have a much better understanding of where things are.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel the same?
Yeah. Yeah, we've been in Manhattan these past couple weeks, and I feel like Manhattan's actually the easiest one to master.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've definitely started feeling like the entirety of the island has shrunk.
Yeah, well, that's actually a good point. Like the other day when we were on 116th Street, and we realized that, we can just walk home from here. It really does feel like, we can just walk home from here. Like it doesn't feel that far. It feels like, well, I'm just going to get through Manhattan and then cross that bridge, and then we are in Brooklyn, and then we're basically home.
Yeah.
So,
which is 13 miles.
Yeah. It's still a half marathon.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's something about just like knowing every spot that makes it feel like we're not too far away.
Yeah.
And then also, Manhattan, I felt like I knew pretty well ahead of time, and yes, definitely understanding it even better. But like you said, it is an easy one to master because it's mostly a grid. And even the neighborhoods that aren't a grid, like they're not huge and they still make sense in relation to the rest of the island. But Queens and Brooklyn, I feel like I'm getting a broader understanding of too. And that I never really had much of a reason to go to a lot of these neighborhoods, and especially wouldn't be walking through the other neighborhoods to get there, or even taking public transportation often, because public transportation isn't really great in the outer boroughs.
Yeah.
To link them together, at least. It's all like goes to the main hub, which is the city.
Yeah.
So I feel good about that. I like that I'm starting to understand better where all these outer neighborhoods are in relation to each other and in relation to me, and sort of what they look like and what they have to offer. what type of people are there and like what types of parks and where it is in relation to the water and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I I think, yeah, just the more that we're there. We've been to Queens now 2 of the 3 months that we're planning on visiting, and it now feels much smaller than the Brooklyn idea, but we'll have 2 more cracks at Brooklyn, so
Yeah,
that'll get smaller as a consequence too. And
right.
yeah, it it is interesting to what feels like almost home grows more and more as you become more familiar with the ways that we travel to home.
Right, that's true.
So,
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to, I mean, I feel like I am getting this understanding of the whole city, but we haven't even been to the Bronx yet.
yeah.
You know, we won't be there until the spring, and purely just because it's a much longer distance for us to get there.
Yeah.
There isn't an option to walk to and from, so we are going to have to stay out there like Staten Island.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really looking forward to that. I feel like as much as I'm getting to know Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, and we've already done Staten Island, there's still, even within that, still more to learn and more to see. And then, yeah, getting our final 5th borough will be really nice.
Yeah. And then as far as the physicality aspect of it, it has been interesting to see the progression of our bodies from the first 6 to 8 weeks of pains and adjustments to the following 6 to 8 weeks of feeling like there's a command that's being identified of the process. And now it is akin to any normal aches or pains you might feel from day-to-day life.
Yeah, I would say it's more for me. Like, I feel like I've gotten like a more regular soreness, like just basic like leg stiffness when I wake up every day. But it's not like it hurts. It doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
I know that as soon as I start moving, it'll go away. It's probably just some sort of like lactic acid buildup or something.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe. I mean, I definitely hobble around in the mornings, but
Yeah.
it's just kind of part of the routine now. So
Exactly.
I'm
I
not-
do wonder when that's going to go away. Like when we're done walking, how long it's going to take to stop hobbling around in the morning.
I don't really think a lot, but I also wonder how long it will take for us to be cognizant of the fact that we're still doing it if we are. If it's just kind of part of whatever routine is, then like might not notice the routine.
I notice it every day
Okay.
that I'm a little sore in
Yeah.
the morning.
Yeah.
And that I like can't really just walk with a full stride until I've taken a shower.
Yeah. I mean, I've noticed it, but I don't notice it as a problem,
Oh, okay.
which I don't know why that is, but I don't.
That's
I guess
good, I
because it's
guess.
just
I've got
part
it
of the
covered.
routine right now. So,
On that note about just being able to walk, it's something that a lot of people have asked me is how it feels to walk the full marathon now. And I do feel like that I'm totally used to, and I say that, but then I'll notice on some days, like at mile 24, I'm like, oh man, like we got to get home. I'm so tired. Like some days I'll just be so tired or particularly sore, or like one part of my body will be aching for some reason, and I don't feel like I have a great handle on why that is.
yeah.
Like if it has to do with how much sleep we got the night before, or what I've eaten during the day, or like, I don't think it has to do much with how much rest, because I feel like there's days that we don't even take a break and I'll be fine at the end of the day.
Well, most of the days we don't take a break anymore
That's true.
compared to what we were doing at the beginning.
Yeah.
But
There's so many different factors though.
mm-hmm.
that I'm not sure when that happens. I can never really tell like what exactly is going on. And it might just be that it's a mental thing, that I start to feel tired and I start to feel like, okay, I'm ready to be done with the day.
Yeah.
And then I just start to like obsess about that or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think most every day at some point I'm like, I don't really want to do this anymore.
Really?
But like, whatever. I mean, it's just like, okay, what are you going to do? Walk to the subway? Like, it's like, you know, I could sit down or something, but then it's like, I'm still going to have to walk somewhere. So it's a pretty easy
Yeah.
to ignore thing. It's just like, yeah, okay, I hear what you're saying, brain, but
Right.
like, we're just going to keep going. So, and it is, I think, a unique physical exertion, task, you know, in that I think that my body, like if I were to do running, my body would be much more likely to just quit or something. But or just other, like if I were lifting something very heavy again and
Yeah.
again, I could see myself walking away. But for walking, it's like it's just such a part of most humans' experiences that
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I guess the times that we would have stopped were in the first 6 to 8 weeks when there was like inexplicable pains.
Yeah. Well, I think about like when we very, very first started doing these walks all the way back when we did the walk in California. And I remember, I mean, I've probably said it on this, like recorded at some point, but there was that one time that I was like, Mike, is it possible for my thighs to explode? Like, I honestly thought my thighs were going to explode. And if we didn't have a place that we had to walk to, I don't think I would have kept going. And I think that might have been a 20-mile day.
No, it was a 27
was
mile,
that
I
the
think.
major one?
Yeah.
Okay. But on those walks, there were days that we only walked 15 or 18 miles or something like that. And at the end of those days, I was exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And I like felt like I could barely make it.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that we've really trained our bodies to be able to do this. And I would think that would happen with other sports, like you're saying with running or with weightlifting or something. Although I agree that there's probably like when you reach your limit with those things, it's more extreme and you really physically just have to stop.
Yeah.
Whereas with walking, you can probably just push yourself a little bit further and a little bit further, and because you can even just go a little bit slower. Like
Mhm.
with running, you can go a little bit slower, but eventually you'll be walking,
Right.
not running.
Yeah.
And with weightlifting, I guess if you can't lift it, you can't lift it.
Yeah. Yeah. We met a man, I think this week, around the bathrooms, because, you know, that's where we meet people. And he was snowing. He was wearing
Oh, this
sandals.
guy, yeah.
He was an Irish man. And we had to use one bathroom because the other bathroom was flooded. So we were both using the women's room. Everybody's using the women's room. And I had on my Highly Varlet hat and jacket. And I went in, and Jessie came out with her Highly Varlet hat and jacket on. And she struck up a conversation with the man. He ended up being a marathon runner.
Yeah.
And
He asked if I was wearing a uniform
Mhm.
because of the branding, and I told him what we were doing, and yeah, he's a marathon runner.
And he was like, I won't do an Irish brogue.
Yeah.
How many marathons have you done? And we were like, 120. And he was like, oh, is that all? And and then, you know, I was telling him I thought that, like, I don't run. It really, like, it challenges me to breathe in ways that I think are special but probably aren't. But I don't know. I don't know where the truth lies in that. But anyway, it's just very challenging for me to run. But I would think that one of the most challenging things about running a marathon would be an understanding of the distance. And I think not only would we have an understanding of the distance at this point, but like we would have a unique advantage because it would seem light years faster Like for some
That's
people be like,
true.
oh, I have to do this for 4 hours. And I'd be like, wow, that's a fast day. That's great. We could like go home and have lunch and like
Right.
take a nap.
Right.
And like then I could edit the podcast. Like I could
Right.
get so much done with 4 hours
Yeah.
as opposed to right now. I mean, we've settled in basically to 50 hours of walking a week.
Yeah.
And that's with like a lot of documentation thrown in there too. I mean, we could go
Yeah.
faster.
We could.
And yeah,
Well, it's interesting, like the body strength buildup type or whatever. Like we have decided to take longer, go slower. Although we don't walk slow, we walk at a nice pace. But I think we do have an understanding of the amount of time it would take or the distance, but to run a marathon would require like all this other physical build up stuff, like lung strength and I don't know what else actually. Some sort of like, I think it's a different like processing system.
mm-hmm. I'm not sure. I haven't invested a lot of time in figuring out how to run it, only how to walk it.
Yeah. Well, I just think because there's a couple times that I've kind of run short distances since we've started doing this. And I guess I don't have the same running problems that you do, but I don't really love running. And I feel like I'm a little bit like, I feel like my capacity for that has increased a little bit, but I guess I don't really know because I haven't tried to run more than like just down the street.
Right.
I'd have to, maybe I should go for like a 2-mile run and just see how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems like a thing that's like on my plate as far as like, I feel like I should have to run a marathon now just because I've walked so many, but I don't know if I'll ever get to it or not.
Yeah.
I'm not really like interested in it. And that's the reason that I feel like I should do it.
Mm. Yeah.
But
I guess we shouldn't like go, neither of us really even know what we're talking about right now, but I am really curious what the main differences would be.
It's just
and like what that process is.
I think the main difference is breathing.
It's just, yeah.
It's breathing and the fact that you're putting significantly more stress on your joints because
right, because it's heavier.
You're throwing your body weight
and,
onto one foot each time. I don't know, it's like 2.5 times the weight or something. And that I'm pulling out of nowhere. But I seem to recall like there is a multiplicative consideration that, we don't have to deal with. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so that's the physical aspect. And then as far as like the mental aspect, I think the walking category is the best place to talk about this idea, which is the amount of perspective we can even hope to have about what we're doing.
Mm.
We're taking the time right now to talk about it. And I think that this is primarily a value for 6 months from now, 9 months from now, a year from now, when we're doing an analysis on the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm understanding this more to be, we programmed ourselves, we put a bunch of inputs into a system at the beginning of this project, and we are now seeing which ones die out and which ones have continued as like important things, what we decide.
Uh-huh.
And just for example, when we Thanksgiving several weeks ago, we gave ourselves the opportunity to take 4 days off.
Mm-hmm.
And by shuffling around walks, we didn't actually take time off. We just did a little shell game. So we had one weekend day prior and 1 weekend day post. What was supposed to be only 1 weekend day post. However, the podcast we most recently did, The Music of Manhattan with Tom Wolfson, the audio, because we were sitting on a bench, required a great deal of post fixing because all the audio was bleeding into every other mic. And as a consequence, we had to actually take off an extra day, which again isn't take off.
No, we just had to shift the schedule.
Yeah. But the idea here is that just spending a little bit of time outside of what our norm was of like 2 days off, 1 day to edit, 1 day to make the videos, and it just throws off the calibration, which is something I've communicated before, to such a degree that the amount of sitting down and thinking time necessary to actually process what we're doing is not possible.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, when we started this, we had a conversation about all the things that we were planning, and it was very clear that like there will not be time for anything else. Like our schedule is so jam-packed that like, I mean, we might be able to fit in a social thing here or there, and we can make time for things. Although we've talked about making time, that doesn't exist. We can choose what we want to do with our time. But the amount of things that we were committing to at the beginning was going to put us in a position where we would need to basically be on for an entire year. And I think there's something about taking those 4 days off, again, whatever, off. We're still walking 5 days a week. Taking 4 days to rest in a row, in some ways it's really nice because during that time I actually feel rested. But then in other ways it's a little bit not ideal, I think, because when we get back into our routine, it like feels like, remember those playground toys where it's like this big spinning circle and like a bunch of kids would stand on it?
Mm-hmm.
It almost feels like the other kids are still spinning the thing and you're like trying to jump back on, and so then for like a couple of rotations you're just like
Yeah. Yeah.
trying to like throw yourself back into the momentum of it.
Yeah.
So because even this week we've been kind of like sleeping in a little later and then getting a later start and then going to bed later, and I think just from having 4 days in a row where we weren't like on schedule and on track, it's like taking me a while to get back onto that.
Yeah, that's what's happening. And having to compensate for the audio, like we did, I only had allotted 1 day to do it, and if everything had gone well, that would have been plausible.
Mm-hmm.
And we could have finished making the videos the Monday after we got home.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we had to make a decision, and it made me very unhappy because it was basically having to make a choice of what is more important, making sure that the podcast comes out every Tuesday, or making sure that the walk time that you had planned in advance was in fact the walk time that you were going to do.
Right.
And ultimately, we chose making sure that the podcast comes out on a Tuesday because there was precedent for shifting walk days around. So that's what we did. It took off a Sunday and a Monday, but it didn't feel good to do that personally. But, that's a me problem and
Yeah.
a consequence of just what we're doing in this project is pretty remarkable. I mean, even though we've normalized it, and it's hard to know, because also just like trying to be a proper level of modest and keeping perspective about what we're doing. But, 131 miles a week, 5 days a week, people are like, well, when are you taking time off? It's like, well, we're not. And it's like, well, what are you talking about? You have to take time off. Or like just all these things where it's like, it's not possible. And we're trying to emulate a paper plan in real life, which is, it's just not possible. And we're choosing as we go along what's not possible. but we're trying to maintain a high standard of what is possible.
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of why having to shift things was upsetting to you is because you hold yourself to an impossibly high standard with like a lot of things, but with this in particular. And that's good. And I mean, that's been helpful for me to make it happen. But then when something has to get switched, I think it feels like a failure, even though it's not, because we still walked those 5 days. That still happened. You know, you just did the Saturday of the next week instead. Yeah. And it's purely just like an internal shifting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, from my perspective, that was perfectly fine.
Yep. And it would have been fine not to do the podcast on a Tuesday too. But
yeah,
it's all about keeping standards and trying to, you know, figure out, this is what we said at the beginning of the project too. I'm sure this is recorded at some point. But just having an ongoing dialogue with ourselves and with anybody that's listening to try and figure out what integrity means, what it means to maintain a through line of an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And when there are inevitable problems that arise, how you respond to them is where the integrity lies, not in the actual output. I mean, the output is a part of, you know, a consequence, but it's more about being able to demonstrate that you're thinking about this and this is meaningful to you, not like, yeah, we just didn't do a podcast that week. I mean, the footage was crappy and I didn't feel like it, you know?
Right. Which, honestly, you know, would be okay too if that's what ended up happening.
If there's a way to communicate that.
Our
right. Well, if there's
standards.
a way to communicate that, which makes sense, which, I mean, maybe that will happen at some point in the next 26 weeks, but it's just like, you know, we realized this particular episode wasn't important to us, and like we need to focus on the walk, which is the primary thing. I don't know. I'm not really interested in coming up with a scenario for what that is.
No, and I'm not really even saying that that's something that we would find acceptable. I'm saying more like, in general, to put something aside because it doesn't meet other standards is acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
but finding like what our specific standards are is just part of the process.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's an interesting example that we'll probably talk about at the end of the project too, but the way that we were planning on doing food changed. I mean, we had this idea that we were going to be doing every 3 weeks bulk food preparation, which changed for, I think, several different reasons. But now, you know, now I think about it, we had the 4-day weekend for your birthday. Right. And I wonder if we hadn't had the 4-day weekend for your birthday, because it was the first month of the project, if that would have been retained or not.
Oh,
like
maybe.
if that fell off because of that. I'm not complaining about it. It makes sense how we're doing. Also,
no, that does make sense though, because that was kind of like a break.
Yeah. And also, I mean, we went to Staten Island in September, which like further changed things. But I mean, another offshoot was that we are not the same level of tired as we were kind of planning for.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem as onerous a task to do cooking.
Well, I think the plan for the food was multifold. It was, we are going to be so exhausted at the end of every day. We're just going to need to warm something up, eat it, and go directly to bed. And that was the case at first for a couple of weeks. And occasionally that's still the case. If we have a particularly long or strenuous day, that does happen sometimes. But yeah, I typically have enough energy to do something. It's helpful to have either some things chopped ahead of time or a couple things prepped, you know, having like pasta or rice available to just like throw in the pot or in the rice cooker is really great. Having some lentils or beans or something soaked or cooked is nice. having like an onion chopped up already so I don't have to chop an extra onion. As simple as that sounds, that is really helpful, but it's also not even necessary. You know, there have been days when we've come home and made like a full meal, like a chicken or something, and that's been fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other consideration was a budget. And we've realized that we're doing fine.
Yeah.
Like we're living on a pretty manageable budget, even if we treat ourselves to take out every once in a while, like once every other week or something, or even once a week we probably could do. And we don't need to actually be quite as strict as we thought we would have to be. And then yeah, like you said, you know, in September we went to Staten Island and we had meals made for us, or, you know, as part of the community there. My mom cooked us a bunch of meals and put that in the freezer. That was nice. I think we still have like 2 of those left to pull from. There were a couple bulk things that I made that then took us through, you know, like making a big stew or something for a week is helpful occasionally. But yeah, it just didn't end up being, it was really helpful, I think, that we did it at the beginning. But it ended up, I think the biggest thing for me is that in order to do that big cooking prep, it requires taking an entire weekend day to do that. And I just have other things that I need to do. And I'd rather get ahead in my studio or get ahead on making thumbnails or get ahead on doing research for our use of force episode or something like that, rather than spending the whole day making like hummus or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's how we ended up prioritizing it.
yeah.
So I think that, I don't know, is there anything further that on the walking aspect before we move on to the podcast?
Well, there's one thing that I wanted to mention that I just thought was like a funny thing that I noticed this week, where I had a new pair of shoes. I got a new pair of Hokas recently, and I was a little concerned about getting new Hokas because my previous pair had given me really serious blisters. I wore them first on our walk in the Pacific Northwest, and I got bad blisters on my heels. So I was concerned that I'd get blisters again, but I didn't get blisters. And I think that I don't get blisters anymore. I guess tap. But I think it's possible that my feet have just somehow grown thicker or something, or like, I don't notice it. Like when I look at them or touch them, they don't seem like gross and weird and thick, but somehow they're just not, they don't seem to be affected by that friction anymore.
Yeah, it seems to be the same for my feet. And also, at the start of the project, we wore thicker socks when it rained, and that was a problem, and now it doesn't seem to be a problem.
Yeah, it's true. I wore some thick socks on one of the really cold days the other day.
Yeah.
It was fine.
I think that if our feet were to get really wet, I think that would create some problems regardless. But otherwise, it seems like that, that's gone away for some reason.
Yeah, so that's cool.
Yeah.
I do have like inner foot pain from time to time.
Yeah.
But that's not even that big a deal.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something going on with my the left front of my ankle periodically. But I don't know. It's fine.
Yeah.